conversation. And so I'm looking forward to the dialogue. So brought to you, obviously, by your organization. Can everyone see the presentation? Thumbs up? Got it. So again, we're happy to bring this conversation, and we'll be talking as a generalist. We'll be covering these topics holistically, and we, for the sake of time, may not be able to dive deep into most of the topics, into every topic, but we will cover every topic in hopes that you will know, or at least learn how it can apply to you. So let's talk about wealth in general. Wealth is a word that can be very intimidating. And I was having a conversation with a client years ago, and they said, I don't have any wealth. And I said, well, yes, you do. If you've got $1, you have wealth. But we often think of it in terms of something tangible, right? We really don't think about it in terms of something that's intangible. So when we think about combining the two, on the tangible side, whether or not that's our real estate, whether or not that's our family heirlooms or our trust accounts or our cars even, we pull that in, but then we also think about what were the intangibles that allowed us to attain those things, right? Whether or not that was some level of common sense, which you can't buy these days, right? You just kind of grow up with it. Either you have it or you don't, and you develop it or you don't. Or a certain level of education, which is not all the time defined in terms of a degree. I clearly know many individuals who never went to college, but they are, Bill Gates, right? Never went to college, but look at how successful he's managed to build this empire, right? Well, sorry, I changed that. He did go to college, may not have finished college, but when you combine the intangible with the tangible, those resources create a certain level of potential that can create long-term economic benefits either for a person or a family or an entity such as a business. And so that's wealth in itself. And so what makes it generational is when we can guarantee that it can transfer from one generation to another generation unencumbered. And what I mean by that is, if you can imagine, for some reason, there's something that psychologically happens to a person's brain when around $1 million, and maybe it's that line that you cross when people go, I just want to be a millionaire. And for some reason, most of us haven't really realized that in the context of what that's worth over a lifetime is really not worth that much. Now, if you had it and you give it to me today, I would say, yes, please give it to me. But the point is that there's something happens psychologically where the brain almost turns off and says, now that I'm a millionaire, I'm something, right? But if you never had it before and then all of a sudden you get it, there are a lot of things that can attach itself to it that causes it to dissolve pretty quickly, whether there is lack of understanding of how to maintain it, grow it, and protect it, or whether or not it is the misunderstanding of what it actually means to have it in the context of the quality of life that it would actually give you. And so the reason why I focus on the comment on the term generational is because it really doesn't do our legacy any good if it cannot be transferred. As an example, and I use personal experiences throughout the presentation. Myself, my wife, and I, we have 3 children. If we squander it all, if we live the lavish life in such a way to where if something happened to either one of us or both of us, unexpectedly, that neither of our children can attain an education, have a means of what we call HIMSS, help, education, maintenance, and support themselves, then it's really not generational. It's really only for ourselves. And so what we have to work extremely hard at is not only attaining wealth, but making sure that we have it in a way to where those that's connected to our legacy that we may not even know can still benefit, especially around the quality and the characteristics and the value that we have while we're still here. So because we've kind of defined generational wealth in this case, I want to pause and say, how does that land on you? Is that a definition that you can connect with, or something that puts it in a space that you kind of understand and can rationalize in a way, and at least try to also formalize a discipline, how you live your life and how you see generational wealth? Does it connect with you in that sense? No one wants to talk. You can maybe shake your head, give them a thumbs up or something like that. Perfect. So if there are any questions, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I said, no, I appreciate what you're talking about. And my screen is off because I was in the background writing something down. But this is Michelle Smith speaking, the one that had the red on.
Love it.
Your definition here is pretty clear, and how you're saying, if you have $1 million and something happened to you, and you give the money to your children, but they don't give it to their children, so it don't become generational. It just becomes like that one generation right there, but it doesn't go further. Is that what you're saying?
So, in a way, what I'm saying is, it's important to recognize that very last word, what it means, unencumbered. So, for an example, if I have $1 million, but I also have about $1.5 million in debt, then I really don't have, it's not generational, because the debtors are going to want that before it goes anywhere else, right?
Okay.
On the other side of that, if it was to, let's say it is unencumbered, I owe no one, I pass away, and I have physical cash, $1 million, and it goes to my 3 children in this case. And let's say that I never taught them or gave them the value of what it means to actually have money, let alone what they should do with it, let alone that, or gave them values that says that to whom much is given, much is required, right? So my expectation would be that they are conscious of giving to their community, right? Or if they were so self-serving to where they took that and they squandered it all and it went away within 2 years or within a year. So the intangible there is having knowledge of what to do with it. It goes beyond what the asset is itself. The intangible are all the things that support actually having it. The desire to work, the desire to save, the desire to give, the desire to learn more about how do I protect it, the desire to make sure that I have adequate life insurance. So it can even go to their children and their children and their children's children, right? And so we're talking. So it's kind of it's a holistic view of what it means to have it, but also what it means to retain it, if that makes sense. Does that land on you well, Michelle?
Yeah, it does. It does. It does.
Great dialogue. I appreciate you for bringing that up.
Oh, quite welcome.
Great. And so let's talk about now that we have, I think, a general idea of generational wealth. So let's talk about really how that defines. So we're going to put ourselves in certain. We're talking about socioeconomic disparities, which I think is a very, very important topic. In this case, we could spend all night on disparities, right? And I think it's regardless of how wealthy you are or how much less wealth that you have, I think if you talk on this subject long enough, we'll all figure out or we'll find a way of some type of disparity. It doesn't really matter who you are, but we clearly know, just based upon the facts alone, I don't think we have to speak a lot about just the disparities that exist. However, I do think it's important to talk about where they actually exist. In this case, education, income, and occupation itself. These are some things that we know. We know when we're talking about education, we're talking about access to a quality education, right? We're talking about the ability, even though these days I'm always questioning my children coming home. I'm used to coming home when I was a child with about 8 books in my arms, carrying them, right? And in a paper book bag, in a paper book cover, right? Jerome wouldn't know anything about that. But my kids have no books. I mean, it's all newspaper, it's all digital, and I'm like, where are the books, right? And for those who can relate, I mean, you were issued a book in the beginning of the school term, and they signed it out to you at the end of the school term. You signed it back in, right? Maybe it was just in Mississippi, but we had an actual book that we were expected to read, and they were actual chapters, right? But in my sense, that was a quality education. Now we start talking about access to that eventually. When we're talking about school systems now, some having access to computers, some don't. And so that is important to have from early childhood education onto post-secondary education. We know that there are disparities there. Money tends to follow where the highest per capita income exists. If you're in an area where per capita income is low, then there's probably not going to be a lot of funds that's going into that community to really build a holistic educational system. And we also talk about for those who at some point, maybe they get through high school, maybe they don't, or if they do get through high school, do they have access to other types of training? For an example, I'll pick on my upbringing again. Back in the day in high school, we had a choice. So by 10th grade, if you knew you weren't going to college, we had what was called VOTAC. And so that meant that you can choose a skill, whether or not that was going to be a nurse or hairdresser, or whether or not that was going to AC repair, something where you had access to a skill. Either way, you have the opportunity to be gainful employed either immediately out of high school or continuing on through your education. So the quality and the access to be able to have that, the disparities that exist there are real. And then where does that lead? That also leads to income, right? So depending upon your level of skill and your level of education, is going to determine your access to a sustainable income that is beyond minimum wage and certainly above poverty, which also speaks to is the person gainfully employed just through employment itself, or is it a matter of having a job, or is it a matter of having a career? So many of us can speak from actually having a career. So we're not in job search. When you actually have a career, you have the occupation because conceivably you have the skill, you have the training, and you have the education within that area. But when we wrap all of these up together, it creates this gap. And those disparities that falls within these 3 buckets create a gap that makes it very difficult to catch up. And you can imagine if you're born into that type of situation and where your socioeconomic scenario is minimized, then it makes it even more difficult. We've been struggling here in Charlotte, for an example, when there was research that was done about 5 years ago, and I worked on a task force that showed that Charlotte, as grand of a city as it is, out of the top 50 cities, it was 50 of 50 cities of upward mobility, which meant that the chances of someone who's born in a low socioeconomic status, the chances of them getting to that next level was little to none. And so it's a very real issue that we're having to deal with. So you put all of that in place to understand that there are real, if you can find yourself in any one of these kinds of gaps, you almost have to realize that the gap exists, but you pick one of these to start breaking down, how do I close the gap in one of them such that it spills off and gives me the best opportunity to excel in the other one. Normally that is in the area of education, because that is where we develop skill building, that's where we create acumen, literacy, because it then spills over into the opportunity to to create and generate more income, whether or not they're starting a business or even being more qualified on the jobs in which we hold, which also allows us to be able to validate and sustain an actual occupation. So again, I could spend plenty of time on that, but I want to set that in the context of how we actually review our status itself. So in this case, we're talking about the socioeconomic status. It clarifies or classifies how our social standing as an individual or group in terms of our access to resources, right? Most of us have heard the term lower class, middle class, upper class, which in my view, I actually think is all relative, because I actually think that if you measured it by asset value or by income, then you actually can miss what a person actually knows, because then you can't measure their potential. And so clearly, if I looked at my own scenario growing up, I would say I was in the lower class, right? But without realizing what was being imparted in me was, you must work hard. You must get an education. You must be nice to people. You must treat people with respect. When you get it, you must give back to your community. Those were things that did not create dividends until much later, right? And so there was this equilibrium with, as you kind of get a level of education. I heard one of my economics professors in graduate school say it this way, that when you attain an education, particularly a master's degree, you can never be a member of the permanent underclass. And that struck me really, really, really strong, because it's hard to rationalize that when you're a struggling college student, graduate, and you're getting out. You're like, but you have all these student loans. What do you mean? I feel like I'm a permanent underclass. But because of the level of education, the exposure, it was impossible, because eventually that is what started the wheels to turn to create certain types of skills that I would not have had around critical thinking and how-tos and problem solving. Though that is the actual skill that, once matched with education, begin to realize itself over time. And then we talk about those inequities as well, which often exist when one group has either privilege or power or control or influence over another group, whether intentional or not. Now, that is saying a lot, right? Normally, the group that has the privilege or the power or the control normally never really admits it, right? So either there is an enormous amount of guilt that comes along with it, which is kind of an unnecessary guilt. But then you have this other side that says, I do have privilege, and I do understand that it's fair, but I'm going to recognize that privilege in a way to where I want to kind of use that privilege for the benefit of others. And so it can be intentional or not. If you're on the side, I wouldn't say victim side, but if you're on the side that's being influenced by it on the negative side, it doesn't really matter whether or not it's intentional or not. All it feels like, it feels shackled regardless. And so we want to talk about inequities in that perspective that allows us to then be able to understand, again, the ground. We're talking about what's in our ground. And so at this point, though, I'm going to pause, but at this point, though, when we can put it into context of where each of us, if you were to evaluate your own situation and you were to classify yourself into one of those buckets, and then you think about income, education, occupation, which one of those you actually can focus on with ongoing adjustments that you make from one year to the next. Then you start to put yourself in a way to where you can then start to develop a plan for what is next for you in life. So before we start talking about starting or building wealth, let's take a quick breath and tell me how this lands on you.
Positive.
What comes up?
Let me take my camera off.
Michelle, you said something?
I would say positive. Very good. It's funny you're talking about all of this because I know everybody was hit with COVID. I know small businesses was a big impact because a lot of us are small business owners that's on this webinar. And for me, I was telling my mentor from Laeta, like this was like the best thing that happened for me. Like COVID was like my eye opener. It was like a great big rainbow over the clouds for me. And some people might say it was a hard thing and it impacted them. I say, yeah, it impacted me financially, but it didn't, because I was in the midst of like taking the time off. I wanted some time off so I could regroup, restructure my business different, go through, check out my savings, see where my money's going. I had more money going out than I had coming in. So it's like, where am I now? I've gotten my budget together, I started my savings, and I started investing. So what you have here, that's where I am. So like for me to be on this webinar, I'm saying to myself, I'm headed in the right direction with my finances and with my business. So this is like, to me, confirmation of where I want to be in my business. As 10 years I've had my business, and I thank Laeta because they've always been instrumental in making my business a success. So this is really great information, as a speaker, bringing this kind of knowledge to small business owners, because there's a lot of things that's available to us and we don't really know, to just go within, seek what we have, and then restructure it. Like, it is really good to see this, that somebody is bringing this out. And then don't get me wrong, I have an MBA, and I went back to get my MBA. So what you said is like, now you see yourself in a different perspective when it comes to money. Mm-hmm. So I'm at the investing part. I saved, redid my budget. Life insurance is taken care of, children taken care of. I did all of this 10, 20 years ago. So now that I'm older, I could really be a little bit more wiser with my money.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that, Michelle. Thank you so much.
I agree with Michelle, and also agree with you, Mr. Fleming, in all that you have said. I'm not a small business owner, but I am an administrator where I work. And one of the things that I always talk to my staff about in meetings, I always talk about budgeting. I always talk about saving and investing and apply to your 401k. That's like free money to a certain extent. Have life insurance, because often, a lot of my staff, I'm in the human service field. So that's a field that you're there for passion, not for money. But understanding how to build generational wealth is information that we don't get in school, and we rarely get it from our families because they don't understand it for the most part. But I was very blessed and fortunate to have parents who lived in the projects, and my mother was a daughter of sharecroppers, but they knew that they wanted a better life for their children, and so my parents from the very start were invested in how do we build generational wealth for our children. And, God bless them, but they're both passed on, but they left nice insurance policies and properties for their children. You know what I mean? As a way of carrying on their legacy, and hopefully it will go to their grandchildren, And so, and from that, out of the money that they left for us, I still have half of it, in savings and invested. And it was so funny. My parents, they were afraid that we may spend all their money from the insurance, that they secured it so we couldn't spend it until we get into our 60s, some of it. So we had to wait until we retired before we could get some of it, which that was very interesting. But but it maintained the money, so we couldn't touch it. But from the very, I mean, I bought my first home when I was 23. Because they, and they encouraged me, and it was a duplex, so it was an income property, and it helped me a lot. My house is paid off now, in my 40s, it was paid off because I invested earlier in my life. And so they taught us a lot about money management, savings, and investing in stocks. In graduate school, half of my I never had a school loan from my bachelor's or my master's because I always paid cash. But in order for me to do that, I played the stock market. So they taught me how to do that. So half of my graduate studies were from, playing the stock market. And I was just fortunate that I was going during a time where the market was really good. I didn't lose a lot. I mean, I suffered when it fell too, but that's how I paid for my education. So they taught us those skills so we would, increase our standard as a family and increasing generational wealth. And of course, I passed those same skills down to my daughter and everyone I'm in touch with. So I'm sorry, I'm going on too long, but yeah, just wanted to say that.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that, Wendy. Those are very real scenarios that I think play out continuously. And so what you've done is that you've set up a pattern of discipline that works well for you, but will also work well for your family. And that then becomes that intangible part that helps your legacy. So I'm certainly glad to hear that. I think, Sarah, you had your hands raised.
Yes, good evening, everybody. I'm Sarah Drummond with Parkside Business, and been thinking a lot about wealth equity and how we can better situate our kids. We have to somehow change their mind or their focus on what money is used for and how it's invested. I was in the Wawa earlier today, and there was a young white guy there, and he pulled out his wallet. He was about 12 years old. And I thought to myself, wow, he's pulling out his wallet. He had cards in there. I don't know if they were actual credit cards or maybe ID cards or insurance cards, but he pulled out his wallet. He pulled out his money. He paid for it. He stuck his wallet back in his pocket. And, I'm thinking, well, wow, I remember going to pay for things with my kids, and I always pulled out my wallet. So it's pretty much like, I just think we need to change the mindset of kids. And of course, our mindset has to change as well. Instead of, really focusing on material things, focusing more on the future and saving for tomorrow and having a vacation home. That type of, we really have to change that mindset. And I think we need to start teaching our kids young about money. I remember when I went off to college back in the 70s, I didn't know what a credit card was. They didn't teach that in high school. I didn't know anything about Black Wall Street. They didn't teach that in high school when I was going. So the curriculum really needs to change and shift to, teaching kids about money and the importance of it, and how you can live off your money, like the young lady shared before me, making your money grow for you, through stocks and bonds and, using the stock market, just spending wisely. And like you said, being more disciplined. Not having to have the newest sneaker out. I think that's where we should begin. That's all.
Sarah, thank you for sharing that. One of the things that we're so unaware of, and Sarah, you bring up the point of introducing the concept, and I'm paraphrasing your comments, but introducing the concept of money management and finance much earlier in to our children. But statistically, and this is the fact that most people don't realize, is that a child starts learning about money in utero. And that is before they're even born. And so I want you to think psychologically about that. In utero, before they can even breathe, before they can even talk, you're teaching them about money. And the reason why is because money and wealth is all centered around security. So when a child is in utero, they're being fed, they're warm, they're kept well, hopefully, right? And when they're born, all they do is suckle. So they're learning what it means to be cared for. And then, so the access to just the sheer, for those who understand psychology, we understand the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? We know food, clothing, shelter, we know all those things, right? So what a child or a person in general, from the time they actually are born, they're learning what it means to receive. And depending upon how well they're cared for, it puts them on this trajectory of how they see money, right? And at some point, if we're giving them everything that they ask for without accountability, or if what they're asking for are things that they want, not necessarily things that they need, if we haven't taught them of what a nickel or a quarter or a dime is, nor what value that it has, they begin to psychologically demonstrate their response based upon how they're being treated from their parents, from their grandparents, from their uncles, their aunts, their cousins. All of that is a part that makes up where they fall within that cycle and how well they have access. Go back to that part about education. That is a part of it. Because they're at ages 0, 1, 2, and 3, they're not even in school, right? Unless it's preschool, right? But they are receiving something that's teaching them about the value of what they have. It may not be the value of $1, but it could be having respect for something that they didn't even buy. They never even bought it, but they have it. They have access to it. So in their minds, it's mine. It's mine. It's my rattle. It's my doll, right? But somebody has to pay for it. They don't really care who paid for it, whether that's grandpa, grandma, mom, dad. It doesn't matter. They want it. And so at some point, though, depending upon how they've been taught, they are going to grow up and make decisions about how they spend their money when they get it, regardless of whether or not it was given to them or whether or not they earned it. Chances are, the more that was given to them without the teaching of where it actually came from, when they actually receive the dollar, they're going to blow through it. I can guarantee it. They are going to blow through it unless, and we'll talk later about, unless there is some type of protection around it that says, no, you can't have it. Unless there's a document that says, no, yeah, your grandparents or your parents passed away, but based upon this trust document, you can only have this if you're sick, or you can only have these resources if you're going to get an education. Oh, no, you can't go and buy a Ferrari. Legally, this is all you can get it for. So we have to start creating that type of dynamic that demands that they are selfless, and they are using more of what God gave them to think critically about what this means for them in the long term. So I wanted to kind of put that in context. I hate to dive so deep into these, but none of this stuff we're talking about is on the surface. We really do have to think critically about how do we actually see, and what message are we demonstrating for those who are actually learning from us, regardless of whether or not they're in a classroom or not. Extremely, extremely important. So we're talking about starting to build wealth here. It used to be that the word that names the female dog used to be the bad B word, but now budgeting is, right? Because budgeting sounds restrictive. It sounds like it's something nobody really wants to do, because budgeting means control in some senses. But in reality, all it really is it's a it's a documentation of knowing what your income is, what your expenses are, such that you know what you have to live within. So you can't live within your means if you don't really know where your means are. You can't say, well, because I make a six-figure salary that I can buy X, X, and X. Because if your expenses make up about 90% of that, then you really can't. So effective budgeting means that you've created the document. In a sense, you write the vision and you make it plain, right? So you write down what my income is, what I bring home after everything that's done, and what is waiting to take that. What are my expenses that's going to take of that budget? And hopefully at the bottom of it, if there's something that is left over, then you can do these other two things like saving and investing. Now I'm going to give you a quick, I call it profile. All of us have one. So a profile, in this case, I'm going to assign a number to it. Generally, it's either 6 or 12. I'll tell you what that means in a second. It used to be 3 and 6. Now it's 6 and 12. It's almost like knowing your blood pressure number, right? But it's 6 or 12. If you are single with no children, no dependents, just yourself, your number is 6. If you are married, one income, your number is 12. If you are single with children, your number is 12. With one income, your number is 12. If you are married or have at least 2 incomes in the household, your number is 6. What that means is whether or not it's 6 or 12, that means that you should have at least 6 months of living expenses saved, or 12. So for an example, I'm the primary breadwinner in my home, right? My wife and I are married, we have 2 children, so my number is 12. So that means that at all times I should have or work towards having at least 12 months of living expenses saved. The reason why that's important is that the severity of me losing my income affects 5 people, including myself, if my income goes away. And so I don't want to have or shouldn't have that level of stress that if my income goes away, I need to be able to comfortably live with at least 12 months if my income goes away. If I'm single and it's only me and I don't have any dependents, no children, then it only affects one person. So the severity of it, as bad as it could feel at the time, is still not as severe as if I had people depending upon me. So that's important to note because effective budgeting helps you to realize what your expenses are, such that you know how much savings you should have. If my expenses are $2,000 per month and my number is 6, and I'm single, then that means I should have $12,000 saved, illiquid, in the bank, accessible to me if something happens. If I am single, my expenses are $2,000 per month, and I have children, then I should have $24,000 saved because that equates to 12 months of living expenses. Why is that important? That is important is because we have to be able to answer the question. We're talking about saving and investing. And so if we understood the concept that saving and investing or applying discipline in saving and investing helps us to build wealth, then we have to know how and when can we start to invest, because investing takes more risk. This is a priority. Budgeting, saving, making sure we have that emergency fund saved for our living expenses, then we can take up on more risk because we haven't missed a step. Now, what happens occasionally is we get so excited about the stock market and we hear about people making money and Bitcoin and blah, 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 and all of this until we jump to, say, taking more risk without substantiating that important step, especially if we have a family of 5 or more than with one income, that we've got to make sure that we clear this deficiencies, which is what I call it. So if your number is 6, and you have 2 incomes in the household, regardless of whether or not you have children or not, and you have $2,000, $5,000 in expenses. I just had a brain lapse because nobody has a family of 5 with $2,000 in expenses per month, right? Then if you're below that number, you really want to make sure you have that, because you don't want to start to use a lot of that income to take up on more risk. Make sense? Thumbs up? Clear demonstration, clear example? Perfect, perfect. Now, you know, I'm going to go through this. We'll talk about really the budgeting process, because this tends to be where a lot of people kind of get hung up on. We're going to spend a little bit of time on this, only because we know that people typically don't like to deal with budgeting. Primarily adults, right? Adults are, I'm independent. I make my money. I can do what I want to with my money. Nobody's going to tell me what to do with it. I'm a grown person. Right? On and on and on. But if we understood what it really meant, it's not meant to control you, because it's your budget. You're managing it, right? You're the one that controls it. So we're talking about the first step is, you know, you set those short-term goals, right? And that short-term goal could be, first, I want to make sure I solidify having that emergency cash fund there. Because if I was single and I had children, there are people dependent upon it. Again, I want to protect. I don't want things to be volatile. I want to make sure that if something happens, then I can, I'm not under the kind of pressure that causes me to do something that I shouldn't be doing, right? This is where illegal things start to happen. Or not even illegal, this is where people start to go to a 99% payday loan and lending against their car. It's just the reality of it. So we have to really try hard to set those goals, have a budget to support those goals, follow the budget. It helps to have an accountability partner. Now, my wife and I, for an example, I'll never forget, we were sitting at the table as if we were kind of negotiating, and we would, every Sunday, first Sundays of every month, would sit down and go through how did we do. We kind of do a look back. How did we do last month? If we were over budget, then as long as it made sense, oh, well, you know, we got some tires on the truck last month. Okay, then we can justify it, we move on. But we would have this conversation because for some reason, you know, I didn't go to the grocery store that often. I mean, I would stop by and she would say, honey, on your way home, would you stop to pick something up? And I'd stop and pick it up. But I really didn't have a concept of having to go into the grocery store to pick food off the stuff and knowing the prices of it. You know, I did that enough growing up, so I tried to forget it, right? But for some reason, she won't let me, right? So we're sitting down at the table and we're trying to negotiate what do we want to put in the line item for food. So in my intelligent self, I give a number, right? You know, I'm a finance guy. We ought to be able to live within these means around food. This is how much it should cost. She laughed. She's like, your son Corbin will eat this up in a week. So we got to come again. And the value of that conversation was that the reason why it takes 2 is because you have to validate what's realistic. Clearly, in my mind, $400 or $500 a month in food wasn't going to do it for a family of 5. And she's like, you go by the grocery store enough, you'll be able to see the prices of things, and you'll be able to see. So where there's 2 decision makers in the house, you've got to be able to make those decisions about what number should go where, and to make sure that it's a budget that you're creating that can actually work and that is realistic. And then hold yourself accountable. Now, for those who are single, that's tough. If you don't have a financial advisor or financial professional who can hold accountable, who can help kind of help you to own your budget and to review it periodically, you almost have to have an accountability partner. Maybe that's a brother or sister or a family member or someone that you trust, but be prepared to kind of go back and to see how are you actually doing. And in that, though, as successful as you can be at budgeting, it creates this energy that you start to feel a sense of success over it. And it's almost like once you live within that budget and you save what you're supposed to save and you create a discipline of living within your means, then you can start seeing your values go up in your savings and in your investments, which helps you to it creates so much motivation. Whereas one time your portfolio may have been $1,000 and now it's 10, then it went up to 10. Now it's over 100,000. That creates excitement, motivation, but it also encourages you to continue to do it. So again, savings in itself, we just want to contribute, make it easy for yourself. It's not really about the amount in the beginning. It's really about getting used to the discipline of doing it. Having it come directly out of your checking account to go over to savings or be payroll deducted. Do it in a way to where you kind of forget about it. It feels like a bill, but it's really not, because every time that happens, you're building equity. You're increasing your net worth. That is a form of wealth. The discipline with the act is a form of wealth. And if you do that over time, it's going to grow, especially when you start taking up on more risk to invest, right? And so we understand that when we start to invest, it's typically not FDIC insured. It doesn't get it and it may lose value, right? So we got to do things then that's suitable for us. In our industry, we do things according to our risk. So Jamila, for an example, if I was to test her risk, which means that I want to figure out on this scale if you're conservative or if you're aggressive or where along that scale you fall, I can test her risk and maybe I'll find out that she's extremely conservative, which means that she may not like risk. If the market goes down, she's just going to collapse, even if it goes down just a cent or two, right? She put in $100 one day and now it's worth $99.95. She's so upset, right? That means she could probably tolerate a little bit of risk. But if that doesn't bother her, and she's like Wendy, who says, no, it doesn't bother me to lose that because I know that the opportunity is to gain double that maybe 6 months down the road, then I'm good with it. So you have to kind of live within that. When you start talking about designing portfolios, that is the guiding light that helps professionals like me to develop a portfolio that fits your needs. Now, it can be difficult with couples. So I'll use myself as an example. And I have to speak very low so that my wife won't hear me in the other room because I'm going to talk about it, right? So we know that whatever we have together has to be blended. It has to be something, it has to be a risk profile that works for both of us. On hers, it has to be extremely conservative. On mine, I'm aggressive. So when the market goes down, I get excited. It's like, what can I buy? What can I buy? When the market goes down for her, it's like, let me call her because I know she's breathing in the bag, even though her portfolio is still up by 390,000%, right? She doesn't want to lose $1, right? And so what we recognize is that it is unfair for me to try to pull her to be more aggressive. And it's also unfair, that's unfair to her, but it's also unfair to me to pull me to be more conservative, because I'm always looking for opportunities when the market kind of goes down. And so both of those, neither one of those profiles are wrong. What's wrong is that when you're in a profile, in a portfolio that's different than how you really feel. And so you want to spend that kind of time figuring that out such that when the market makes its turns and adjustments, that we're not disappointed in the process. So I feel like we're having some fun, but I also feel like I need to stop there because I see some eyes moving. I see some heads shaking. I want to know what's on your mind before I go to the next sector.
So Lisa had a question in the chat. She asked,
Okay.
how do you become the accountability person when people are excessive spenders and the arguments start?
How do you become an accountability person? Meaning, how do you be the accountability person for someone else, or how someone else becomes your accountability person? Give me more color on that question. So I think if I understand it in a way to where the person is married,
or you do take one that if you are the accountability person for someone who obviously has an issue with budgeting and money and saving and stuff, how do you keep the arguments down? Like you said, that compromise. If you're the person that doesn't like to spend any money and they spend all the money, it could be a marriage, it could be your siblings or your kids, whoever you're in business with, because that's really where it's at. It's a partnership, in or out. And how do you get along with that partner that takes offense to even the word budget?
Okay,
Like,
gotcha. I got you. I get that. So I'll use another example of my own. So the very quick answer is you can't force someone into accountability. Sometimes you have to allow them to make mistakes. Now, I say that if it is a partner, if it is a spouse, pray really hard, right? If you have the opportunity to separate your funds from that person, do it. If it's a partnership, obviously it's a little bit different, right? I'll tell you about the actual scenario that my wife and we laugh about this now, right? It wasn't funny at the time, but again, when I go back to our grounds, right? My experience was that's where the work begins, because it's not about why they're doing it and what they're doing. It's about it's not about what they're doing. It's about why. And sometimes it takes some help, maybe some degree of therapy and counseling. Maybe you are not that person to fix it or to address it.
amen.
Maybe that is the time to bring in a professional that's going to have the conversation and be the person. So again, when we go back to what was in our ground, so my experience was, to share with you, growing up the way that I did, that resulted me into excessive saving. I saved everything. I mean, if I made it, I saved it. Don't need to buy anything else. And that worked for me. And then I met my spouse. And he said her personality was, if you work, you enjoy, right? So we were on kind of two different spectrums of it. And for me, it was, my way is working for me. And for her way was working for her. But together, it wasn't really working. So my way wasn't healthy. I thought, because I could save everything, and for me, it was validating the fact that I can save money, and I was a good steward over it. But it actually got kind of exhausting to just work all the time and save everything and not even vacation. That didn't work for her, and ultimately over time, I figured it certainly didn't work for me. And I thought, actually, this kind of stinks to work and to save this much and not do anything with it and not even enjoy it. That defeats the purpose. But on the other extreme there was some reeling in on her side, was that we've got to find that happy medium to where we create the quality of being accountable. So when you're married, obviously you're forced to be accountable, right? You've got, not really forced, but it helps you to be, that is the reward, right? You're accountable to each other. You have joint goals. You can build those together as long as everybody buys into it and everybody agrees to it and is actually a part of that process. It's a little bit different. But I've clearly had cases to where I had to really be the mediator between husband and wife, or families even, because they were not the ones that, they were not the right ones to be the ones to tell the other person what they should and what they shouldn't do, how they should budget, how they should not budget. It takes a professional to be able to do that, and that can also bring in the tools that can explain things in a way that can actually help them to see a different alternative. Wendy, you had a question. Lisa, did I answer your question? Thumbs up?
Yes, I think Michelle had a question.
Yes, first. Yes, she
Okay,
had
was
one
it
before
Michelle or
me.
Wendy? Okay. Wendy,
I,
okay,
you
got
have
it.
given Mr. Fleming, you have given a wealth of information. I mean, it's totally abundant information, and you've said a lot. But I was asking, do you think that your conservativeness on saving is because of your extreme poverty background of coming up? Do you think that's one of the reasons why, when it comes to like investing, the way you invest and save is because of that?
Absolutely. I can direct how I view it now. I can connect it directly to how I grew up. I knew that saving was big for me because I knew what it felt like to not have. And I said, that will never be my reality again. I will never have a repo guy come into my house to pick up my car or my television. I don't think they repo televisions anymore. But, well, they did when I was growing up, right? I knew what it felt like to turn the water on and there not be running water. I knew what it felt like for the phone not to be on in the house and have to go to my neighbor's home to use the phone. I knew what it felt like to maybe have propane gas sometimes and not when it's cold. And so I kind of built around that, and savings, in my view, was the number one way of bringing down, of fighting the defense against poverty for me. And so, but it took a while. And then what I learned was I actually kind of like the idea of not only saving, but I also kind of like the idea of being able to do without something long enough to see dividends come in that works for me, which is what investing did, right? So when we think about putting money into a savings account and then it earning you 0.0001% interest and maybe 30 cents a month, right? That is a big difference than buying a stock and then it paying you dividends that's reinvested over time. And I like the idea of putting it over there and seeing those dividends pay me without me having to work as hard for it. And so once you understand that compound way of giving to yourself, it changes your mindset and it gets you closer to what people say all the time, and that is, I want my money to work for me. They say that a lot, but they rarely ever put it in places that actually work for them. Yeah.
Now that's one thing. That's why I said you have given a lot of information, and I think that's another thing. Like with the entrepreneurs, Black communities, and Wendy, you said that earlier when you were talking about how you encourage employees to invest back into themselves. A lot of companies are not fortunate to have employees or overseers like you when it comes to teaching employees how to do that. I worked in corporate America as a marketing and advertising company, small Black-owned business, that we didn't have those opportunities to invest back. I worked in a finance department in the city of Philadelphia. Again, my mindset when it came to money was always saving. But Mr. Fleming, there's a difference of savings in a savings account versus savings where you're seeing your money come back to you with dividends. There's a big difference. Like if you don't know that and you're working and working and working and working and working, and then 20 years you go to retire and you like, okay, well, where did my money go? And where did my time go? You don't see any fruits from all of that. So, everything you said is very key and is very important, but people really need to know the difference between having your money work for you, average just sitting there getting $2 or $30 at the end of a year versus $300 or $400 at the end of a year with, proper investments and proper savings. It is a big difference when you learn what wealth is and how it works for you.
Absolutely. It is a tremendous difference. It's a tremendous difference. Exactly right. 100%. 100%.
I just have a comment on working with partners who have different spending habits than you do. One of the things I thought was successful in my years as an adult, I had a partner who he just spent money like it was like water. It just came out the drain and was gone. Nothing saved, nothing, and it drove me crazy. So I said, in this house, we have to have 4 accounts, four accounts, because I can't have you wasting my money, or I should not have to put more into paying bills because you don't have it because you spent it on something else. You know what I mean? So, you know, we had a joint checking account where we had bills that would come out. You know, we had a joint savings when we both had contributed money to the savings for whatever other goals we may have. And we both had our own individual account, which I used to call our play money. You know what I mean? So you can do whatever you want with your play money, and I can do whatever I want with my money, you know, but we had accounts that took care of the bills and the savings. And I think that saved a lot of arguments with us, you know, on that topic. I just wanted to share that.
Well, I'm glad that you did, because Wendy, what you're speaking of is the importance of finding what works for you, right? And that you have to figure it out, because there is no book that says, if you're married, you got to have this, this, and this, right? The fact is that, and even as you kind of read those books, it doesn't appeal to someone's personality. Personality creeps in, and it's all centered around security, right? There's certain things that make us secure. You could give $10,000 to 2 individuals, even if they grew up in the same household, right? I'll use me and one of my older siblings. It's 8 of us, so I don't have to mention a name, right? Because you'll never know who they are. But one of my older siblings, if you gave me 10,000 and gave her 10,000, for me, I'd probably have mine 5 years from now, because if you just gave it to me and there wasn't a need, I'm not going to go out and spend it, because I'm not going to create a need to spend it. But she would think about everything that she could spend it on, right? And what's low on the list would be saving some of it. And but that's a personality thing, right? That is a trait that exists. You know, I didn't create her, right? But those are personalities that you have to learn to work with. But that's fine, because she's a sister. It's interesting when you have to live with a person, and then you have to find a way to work with different personalities, but also figure out, are there any danger zones as well? And it may not be whether or not there's a case of spouse. It could be a case of children, or it could be a case of if you're in an organization where there's frivolous spending, and you're trying to save money so that you can build a new center for the kids across town, and the organization wants to spend money on things that really doesn't matter, right? That's less philanthropic. It exists. And so this is where personality sometimes can be a huge factor in whether or not you succeed or whether or not you digress. And so you all comments are just dead on. I really appreciate you all for making this exciting. So this is, when we, this is really the last slide here as we're talking about business. And I understand that many of you don't have your own business, but we're talking about, wealth by building, by creating a business, which business owners, entrepreneurs are very different thinkers, right? It's not that they're better, not that they're worse, not that we're better or worse. It just means that they're different thinkers. Oftentimes, we take more risk. There are some that take calculated risk, like I do, and then there are others that just jump and say, I'm going to take a risk, and they didn't realize that the pool had no water in it, right? But in this case, building wealth by creating a business can be a powerful way of creating generational wealth, depending upon the profile of our family, right? For an example, if it is a business that the family, that's centered around something that the family actually enjoys doing, right? Maybe it's selling water boats, and the whole family lives on the lake and they just like water, right? That could be a way where it becomes a family business. Or if it's a business where only one person works in the business and nobody else is interested. Either way, I want to kind of go through these kind of different dynamics of what it means to create, but also really what it means of things we should be thinking about or could be thinking about when we're trying to create generational wealth by creating a business. So the first thing is that, for one, we have to recognize that either way it is a personal sacrifice. Whether you're making a transition for corporate America and you say, you know what, I quit, I want to work for myself, that is a personal sacrifice, because unless you have a rich uncle, which I did not, I mean, all of my uncles were calling me asking me for money, right? Unless you have a rich uncle or a rich aunt who can invest in your business, then the personal sacrifice will come from your own capital that has to be invested into the business. Personal sacrifice by way of time. Personal sacrifice by way of additional certifications. Personal sacrifice by way of always business developing. And that is something that you will do for the rest of your life as a business owner. And so that is pretty broad, but personal sacrifice is a huge one, because it gives you a certain commitment that if nobody shows up that day, then you must show up. Doesn't really matter, you must show up. And then there's a considerable amount of planning that goes into place, right? So you may hear these stories, and as you can imagine, I can name a number of stories where I've received a call and someone wants me to vet a business, this idea, not even a business. There's no planning done. There was no writing. It was just an idea, and it sounds good. And I said, well, so have you? So it's all in your head, right? It sounds good, but it's all in your head. Where's the planning behind it? Well, I'm going to work on the business plan. Okay. Well, then how do you describe it in a way to where you can't go back to it? Because how I think about it today will be different than how I think about it 2 weeks from now. So how do you start to lay out the plan that makes sense, that you can actually give to a Jamila or give to a Katie or give to a Jerome, and they say, this makes sense or it doesn't make sense. So the planning takes time. If you are actually working for a job and you're considering leaving the job to start your own business, planning can start years before you actually pull the plug that says, I'm out. And it doesn't have to necessarily, planning could be saving for it such that you don't have to borrow money to start it. You don't have to take out an SBA loan. All of that is part of the planning and the patience as well that goes into that. Then we talk about the different types of businesses itself. Depending upon the state in which you live, it is important to spend time on which one that benefits you. Am I going to be a sole proprietor? Am I going to be the only person that works in this business? Or am I going to create an LLC? Or am I going to create an S corporation? Or will it be a C corporation? You know, those things have to be planned carefully, because depending upon the type of business entity that you choose, there could be a very different tax treatment on those, which could, if chosen the wrong one, if you have one way of wanting to operate, but then you choose a business type, an entity type that will not serve you well, you could create conflicts later on, especially if you want to hire additional employees. For an example, if you wanted to set up certain types of 401k plans or certain types of retirement plans for your business, it could be that the S Corp would be the best type of entity to have to institute such a plan. But if you were to choose a sole proprietorship, then it would be very difficult to carry on some of the things that you want to offer because of the business type that you're setting up. Now, adjustments can be made, and this is the case where no one ever has all of the information, right? So this is why the case where you actually want to reach out and you want to talk to someone or even hire someone And those things that you're just not good at creating business plans, hire someone to do it. That could be part of the investment. And guess what? It could be tax deductible as well. Right, Katie? That's important. And then when we start talking about how do we scale, right? Will this be something that I'm going to create just as a business for my lifetime, and I really don't expect there to be a continuum or anyone from within my family to carry it on? Then may look one way, or I may operate one way. But if I want to create this huge enterprise where at some point I may want to franchise it, that's a very different concept that may require access to capital, fundraising, how to raise funds of someone who can actually invest in your business. The lens in which you plan through is very different in that case. And at the end of it all, we have to know that no one lives forever. And we have to always think about, well, what happens? Not necessarily what happens when I turn 75 and I don't want to work anymore, or not necessarily what happens if I pass away because I know I'm going to live at 95. I pass away, what happens to the business? But what just happens if something happens to you unexpectedly? What happens to the business? How does it get from its existing state today to transfer to where it should be? Is there something in place that says, I want to sell it? Has there been conversation that's happened with a person whom you think that may want to buy it, that you want to put into an agreement that says, offer it to these people first, and if not, sell it? Is there an attorney that has drawn up the document that says, these are the things that should happen? Does anyone else in the family know how it should transition? And so all of these things are extremely important, because then we're thinking about not only creating the business, we're thinking about how it evolves over time and what happens for the things, not only the things that we can see, but the things that we can't see nor anticipate as well. It is extremely important that when we think of these ideas, right, and some of them may be realized and some of them may not be, but sometimes there is I call them a head jog, or a fog, I should say, to where we're foggy on these ideas and we have problems with converting them over into reality. And there's a way that it happens mentally, and then there's a way that it happens on paper. And how it happens in the access that you have to making it a reality can be extremely challenging. But at the end of it all, creating business as a wealth generator could be powerful. But you have to know when to pull in resources to fill in the gaps that you have, but to also know, be able to create the path that your business is going to run on and how you function. When to hire that extra professional and when not to hire. When to make it to see it as an investment, because at some point it's a matter of creating time that we can be most effective in running the business as well. And so these are very real scenarios because I've experienced them myself as well. What I can say is that for any woman going into business today, now is a prime time to do so. Why? It is because congressionally, when we hear about all of the opportunities, especially under the current administration, it is extremely sensitive and opportunistic for business owners who are women, minority business owners as well. There's a lot of capital out there. SBA lending now is freeing up pretty well for that. But just because there's capital doesn't necessarily mean that it's still a good idea to do it. You want to go into it with a lens and to find an accountability partner. There goes that word again. Find an accountability partner who can help you to realize, who can be a good listener, and can help you to check and balance your ideas, but at the same time, not be a hater on your ideas, but someone who's going to support. because you will find most that will tell you not to, especially if they're not as courageous enough to do it as well. So, folks, ladies, this is the end. I had fun talking with you all and sharing. I am so hoping that this was helpful for you. I'm hoping that it jogged some things or triggered some movement, some creative juices flowing as well. And I would like to just open it up for more questions that you all may have of something I may have mentioned. Tell me, what do you think? Was it good information? Was it information that you wanted and needed? And now tomorrow you're going to be the next billionaire? Give me some information.